My beloved child, there is something that was spoken in a quiet moment, something never meant for many ears. It was shared softly, almost carefully, as though the person speaking understood that these words carried great weight. Those words have been moving closer to you with every passing day, even if you have not yet heard them yourself. The person you love stood before someone they deeply trust. For a brief moment, their entire expression changed. Their voice became softer. Their words slowed down. It was almost as if they were trying to protect something precious, something too important to speak carelessly. What they said about you did not begin with your name. It began with silence. And that silence carried meaning. Do not leave now, because what happened in that conversation was not ordinary. Stay until the end, because something important was revealed. A single sentence was spoken that immediately changed the atmosphere around them. The person listening could tell right away that this was not casual conversation. Even before your name was mentioned, emotion had already filled the room. They looked away first. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they had too much to say and did not know where to begin. The person listening asked a simple question. Why do you keep thinking about them? For several seconds, there was no answer. That pause meant more than any quick response ever could. Sometimes truth arrives slowly because it carries real weight. Sometimes the heart needs extra time to place deep feelings into words. When they finally answered, every word came carefully, as though those thoughts had already been living inside them for a very long time. They said they could not fully explain it, but there was something about you that stayed with them, even when everything else in life moved forward. Those words were not spoken lightly. They came after long nights of reflection. They came after hidden moments, private memories, and feelings they had never shared with anyone else. The person sitting across from them noticed something important. Even while speaking, they seemed lost in memory. Perhaps they were remembering your voice. Perhaps they were remembering your smile. Perhaps they were remembering one small detail that you never imagined could remain so deeply inside another person's heart. The conversation continued. They were asked another question. Is it serious? Again, silence appeared. This was not hesitation. It was not confusion. It was the kind of silence that comes when someone already knows the answer, but realizes that the answer is much larger than they usually allow themselves to admit. Then they finally spoke. Every time they tried to ignore these feelings, something always brought them back to you. That confession changed everything. The conversation was no longer casual. It had entered a place where hidden emotions become impossible to completely hide. The person listening leaned forward. They understood this was not about temporary feelings. This was about something that had survived distance, time, distractions, and even pride itself. Then something unexpected happened. The person you love described one thing about you that surprised even the listener. They did not begin by talking about your appearance. They did not mention circumstances. Instead, they spoke about the feeling your presence creates. They said that, even when you are not physically near, thinking about you brings an unusual sense of calm. Those words remained in the room long after they were spoken. People do not speak about calm unless it has touched them deeply. Calm means your presence reached places inside them where noise usually exists. Calm means your memory entered spaces once filled with confusion. Calm means that somehow, without even trying, you brought peace where there was once unrest. The listener asked another question. Then why have you not said more? This time the answer came immediately. Because some things feel too important to speak carelessly. Those words carried more truth than they intended to reveal. Many people protect their deepest feelings, not because those feelings are weak, but because they matter so much that even speaking them aloud feels risky. They were not hiding emptiness, they were protecting meaning. Then came a sentence that no one expected. A sentence so direct that even the listener became quiet afterward. They admitted that sometimes they wonder if you truly understand how much you change the way they think. That was the moment everything shifted. You may never have seen the exact moment your presence began affecting them. Perhaps it happened gradually. Perhaps neither of you noticed it at first, but inside them, that moment became unforgettable. Something about you settled deeper than ordinary memory. Something stayed. The conversation continued. The listener smiled gently and asked another question. "What are you afraid of?" For the first time, their voice dropped almost to a whisper. They admitted that what they feel may already be much bigger than they ever intended. Those words were not accidental. They came from someone who had tried to measure their emotions and discovered that those emotions no longer fit inside simple explanations. Bigger than planned means your importance quietly grew beyond expectation. Bigger than planned means what began as something small did not remain small. Your name was spoken once again. This time, it was spoken with unusual softness, almost as though simply hearing your name aloud changed the atmosphere around them. Then came the final question. If they were standing here right now, what would you say? Once again, silence filled the room. But this silence was different. It was not uncertainty, it was depth. After several moments, they finally answered. They said they would probably tell you that you matter far more than you realize. That sentence remained long after the conversation ended. It echoed inside the room, even after both people moved on to other subjects. Because some words do not disappear once spoken. Some words remain alive because they come from places inside us that have waited too long to be heard. Tonight, that truth carries meaning for you. Not because every mystery becomes clear in a single moment, but because hidden truths often begin quietly. They begin when someone finally stops pretending they feel nothing. Yet the conversation was still not over. The person listening looked at them carefully and asked one final question. When did you first realize they were becoming important to you? That question changed everything. Their expression shifted immediately. They lowered their eyes and searched through memories, almost one by one, trying to discover where it all truly began. For a long moment, they remained silent. Then they finally spoke. It was not one large moment, they explained. It was many small moments that simply refused to disappear. That answer transformed the entire conversation. Small moments are powerful. A voice unexpectedly remembered. A simple message revisited during quiet hours. A smile recalled without warning. A sentence replayed over and over. A small act of kindness that somehow remained unforgettable. These are never random memories. These are signs that someone has left a mark much deeper than they intended to admit. The listener recognized this immediately. They asked another question. What kind of moments? For the first time during the conversation, a small smile appeared. It was quiet. It was hidden. But it was real. They spoke about the times you listened when nobody else truly listened. They remembered the moments when you showed kindness without expecting anything in return. They remembered the way you made ordinary conversations feel meaningful. They remembered how you noticed things that others ignored. Most of all, they remembered how they felt when they were with you. Because sometimes people do not fall in love with moments alone. Sometimes they fall in love with the feeling those moments create. And that feeling remained. Even after distance, even after silence, even after time passed. No matter how much they tried to move forward, pieces of you continued returning to their thoughts. The listener finally understood. This was no longer simply affection. This had become something deeper, something lasting, something impossible to easily forget. And perhaps, without fully realizing it, you became part of their inner world, a part they carry with them every single day, whether they speak about it or not, whether they admit it or not. Because some connections are not measured by words alone. Some connections are measured by what remains when everything else fades. And somehow, through all the changes, through all the distractions, through all the passing days, you remained. That is why your name still carries emotion. That is why your memory still brings calm. And that is why, deep inside, they know that what they feel can no longer be ignored forever. Then came words that sounded as though they had been waiting inside for a very long time. They spoke about the way you communicate without trying too hard. They spoke about how ordinary things somehow feel different whenever you are involved. They admitted that they remember details they never expected to remember. Small details, simple moments, things that should have disappeared from memory long ago, yet somehow remained. That honesty surprised even them, because people do not usually notice how deeply someone has affected them until they begin speaking about it aloud. Do not leave now, because this was the moment the conversation became impossible to ignore. The listener leaned closer and quietly said that they notice much more than they pretend. For the first time, there was no denial, only a quiet admission. They acknowledged that they probably notice far more than they should. Those words carried enormous meaning. People only speak that way when their heart has already moved beyond its usual boundaries. It was clear they had tried to keep everything controlled. They had tried to remain logical. They had tried to convince themselves that these feelings were manageable. But control becomes difficult when someone continues to matter in quiet and unexpected ways. Stay until the end, because something important was still waiting to be revealed. Then something happened that surprised even the listener. Your name was spoken once again. But this time it carried warmth that could not be hidden. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was simply real. After saying your name, they added something that completely changed the meaning of everything spoken before. They admitted that you have no idea how often you cross their mind. That sentence settled heavily into the silence. Because frequency reveals truth. People may hide emotions, they may hide intentions, they may even hide vulnerability. But repeated thoughts often reveal what remains active deep inside. When someone repeatedly returns to your thoughts, it usually means something unfinished still exists within the connection. The listener smiled softly and asked why they continue to keep all of this inside. The answer came immediately, almost as though they had asked themselves that same question many times before. They explained that when something matters too much, every word suddenly becomes important. You become careful. You weigh every sentence. You wonder whether your meaning will be understood. That was not fear, that was value. Carefulness often appears when someone does not want something precious to be misunderstood. Do not leave now, because the strongest revelation had still not arrived. The person listening asked one final question. What would surprise them most if they heard you speaking right now? For the first time, there was no long pause. The answer came directly. They admitted that they speak about you with more honesty in this conversation than they ever have anywhere else. That confession changed the atmosphere immediately. Private honesty often carries more truth than public words. In that moment, they were not trying to impress anyone. They were not performing. They were not protecting an image. They were simply speaking a truth that had become impossible to deny. Then came a sentence so unexpected that even the listener became silent. They admitted that sometimes they hear something completely ordinary during the day, and somehow it reminds them of you immediately. Think carefully about what that means. When ordinary moments become connected to someone, that person has moved beyond simple attention. Your memory begins appearing naturally inside daily life. A voice, a familiar phrase, a place, a song, a passing thought, a certain time of day. Anything can suddenly become connected to you. Stay until the end, because the conversation continued becoming even deeper. The listener gently asked whether they believe you would ever accept or believe any of this. A small pause followed. Then came a quiet answer. They said you probably would not believe it because they have never shown how much remains inside their thoughts. That sentence explained everything. Not all feelings arrive loudly. Some emotions stay hidden because the person carrying them is still trying to understand them. Some truths remain behind silence because silence feels safer than revealing too much too soon. Yet despite all of that, the truth still emerged that day. Before the conversation ended, one final sentence escaped. It sounded almost like a private truth that had accidentally found its way into the open. They admitted that if you ever knew everything they had shared during this conversation, you would finally understand why forgetting you never became easy. Those words remained suspended in the room. No one rushed to answer. No one interrupted the silence. Some words feel too complete to disturb. But what happened afterward became even deeper. Because that conversation did not truly end inside that room. It continued long afterward. It continued inside their thoughts. Later, when the conversation should have already been over, something unexpected happened. The person you love did not leave immediately. Instead, they remained standing there for several extra moments. It was almost as if something unfinished still pressed against their heart. The listener noticed. They remained silent. Sometimes silence creates enough space for the deepest truths to finally appear. And that is exactly what happened. Without being asked another question, they suddenly spoke again. Their voice was slower this time, softer, more thoughtful. They admitted that there is something strange about all of this. Even when they deliberately decide not to think about you, something always brings you back into their mind. Those words came without preparation. There was no hesitation. There was no attempt to change the subject. Only honesty arriving unexpectedly. The listener turned fully toward them. They immediately understood that this was no longer an ordinary conversation. This had become one of those rare moments when someone begins revealing emotions they normally keep protected. Then another silence appeared. This silence felt even deeper than the ones before. Because once truth begins, more truth usually follows. A few moments later, they continued. They explained that these thoughts return during completely ordinary situations, in the middle of everyday life, without warning, and somehow, each time they return, they feel stronger than before. Those words carried enormous meaning. Random thoughts do not repeatedly return with growing strength unless the connection behind them remains alive. Passing memories fade, temporary feelings weaken, but emotions that return stronger each time often have roots far deeper than ordinary attention. Do not leave now, because what they said next changed everything again. The listener carefully asked, what returns first? Is it the memory? Is it the feeling? Or is it the unanswered question? After a brief pause, the answer finally came. It is the feeling. That answer mattered more than almost anything said before. Memories can appear accidentally. Feelings are different. Feelings return because something inside still recognizes meaning. Feelings return because something remains unfinished. This time they did not immediately speak your name. Instead, they looked downward. A small smile appeared, almost as though they were quietly recognizing something within themselves. Then they spoke in a voice softer than before. They admitted that some people remain inside your thoughts in a way that never asks permission. That sentence stayed with everyone in the room. Ordinary memories are easy to understand. Everyone experiences them. But this was not described as ordinary. This was described as something that arrives on its own, something that remains present even while life moves in different directions. Stay until the end, because there was still more truth waiting to appear. The listener asked one final question. What happens whenever their name enters your mind? This time there was no hesitation, no attempt to avoid the truth. They answered honestly. For a brief moment, everything else becomes less important. That confession carried more power than they intended. Because when someone admits that everything else fades, even temporarily, it reveals where their attention naturally goes. Attention moves toward what matters, toward what remains meaningful, toward what the heart still recognizes. And in that quiet moment, they realize something they had been trying not to admit for a very long time. No matter how busy life becomes, no matter how much time passes, no matter how many distractions appear, your presence inside their heart has never completely disappeared. And perhaps, deep down, they already know that it never truly will. Then another sentence came, spoken carefully, almost as if they understood that saying it aloud revealed far more than they intended. They admitted that they had started noticing details they never imagined they would care about. The listener immediately became curious and asked what kind of details they meant. There was a small pause, a quiet breath. Then the answer came slowly. They spoke about the way you talk, certain words you often use, the expressions that appear when you are excited, thoughtful, or quiet. Even small things that most people would never consider important. Little habits, simple reactions, tiny details that might seem meaningless to everyone else. Yet somehow, those details remained. That answer explained everything that had been hidden beneath the surface all along. Attention always reveals value. People do not remember small details unless those details have quietly become important to them. No one accidentally remembers the ordinary parts of another person. Those memories remain because something deeper has already formed. Do not leave now, because the strongest part of the conversation was still ahead. The listener softly observed that they sounded like someone who had already spent a great deal of time thinking about all of this. For the first time, there was no denial, no attempt to laugh it away, no effort to minimize what they felt. Instead, they gave an answer that completely changed the atmosphere. They admitted that perhaps they had thought about you far more than anyone realizes. Those words landed heavily. Hidden thoughts often carry more truth than visible expressions. What people share openly may only reveal a small part of what exists inside them. What they think privately is often much deeper, far more personal, far more honest. Then something unexpected happened. Something that sounded almost like a confession spoken quietly to themselves. They admitted that sometimes they wonder whether you can somehow feel any of this without ever hearing it spoken aloud. That was not an ordinary sentence. People do not ask themselves questions like that unless their feelings have already moved far beyond simple curiosity. Because no one wonders whether another person can sense their thoughts unless those thoughts have become constant enough to matter deeply. Stay until the end, because something important was still waiting to be revealed. The listener asked one final question before the moment shifted. If you were standing here right now and heard everything, what would be the hardest thing for them to admit? This time, the silence lasted longer than before. It was not empty silence. It was thoughtful silence. The kind of silence that appears when someone is deciding whether to reveal something they normally keep hidden. Finally, the answer came. It was spoken with unusual honesty. They admitted that they had spent a long time pretending everything was normal while carrying far more feelings than they ever expected. That sentence quietly revealed everything. Trying to act normal means something inside has already changed. Carrying more than expected means emotions have moved much further than originally planned. Sometimes people continue smiling. They continue with daily routines. They continue behaving as though nothing has changed. But deep inside, they know something is different. Before leaving, they added one final sentence, a sentence that remained long after it was spoken. Yet what happened after they walked away revealed even more than the words themselves. The conversation should have ended there. It should have been over. But it was not. Because sometimes the strongest truth is not found in what someone says while sitting in a room. Sometimes it appears in what they do immediately afterward. The person you love took only a few steps before stopping, No one called their name. Nothing interrupted them. No one asked another question. They stopped because their own thoughts had suddenly become louder than everything around them. Do not leave now, because what happened during that quiet moment revealed more than every sentence spoken before. Stay until the end, because something important was unfolding. For several seconds they simply stood there, looking at nothing, almost as though replaying every word they had just admitted. Then very softly, almost as if speaking only to themselves, they repeated your name once again. That moment mattered. People only repeat someone's name in silence when the feeling connected to that name remains alive. Even after the conversation ends, even after everyone else has moved on. The listener, who had not fully left yet, noticed. Curious, they asked one final, unexpected question. Why do you always become quiet after talking about them? The question arrived without warning. This time there was no attempt to hide the truth. The answer came immediately. They explained that every time they speak honestly about you, they realize how much they usually leave unsaid. That sentence changed the meaning of everything spoken before, because it revealed that the earlier conversation was not the complete truth. It was only the portion that managed to escape, only the words that felt safe enough to share. There was still more hidden beneath the surface. Do not leave now, because the next revelation carried even greater weight. The listener remained still, then carefully asked what remained unsaid. A longer silence followed. Not empty silence, thoughtful silence, reflective silence. The kind of silence that appears when someone is standing very close to a truth they rarely acknowledge. Finally, they answered in a lower voice. Some days they pretend to focus entirely on other things, work, responsibilities, daily life. But even on those days, something small always reminds them of you before the day is over. That answer was quiet. Yet it carried tremendous power. Hidden remembrance is often stronger than spoken attention. If someone appears in your thoughts during ordinary hours, it means they are no longer simply remembered. They have become woven into the rhythm of everyday life. They exist inside routines, inside habits, inside ordinary moments. Stay until the end, because the conversation was not finished. Another question followed. What kind of small things bring them back? This answer came almost immediately, as if those moments had already been counted many times before. They mentioned a familiar phrase, a certain sound, a particular place, a passing conversation, a simple moment that suddenly feels connected to you for reasons they cannot fully explain. Sometimes it happens while walking, sometimes while driving, sometimes during completely ordinary moments when nothing special is happening. Yet suddenly, there you are again inside their thoughts. That admission carried something extraordinary. Connection cannot be forced. It appears naturally, quietly,